For this assignment, we will be answering the question, did the Treaty of Versailles lead to World War II? For this close read, we're going to look at a letter that was written by the leader of the German peace delegation, Count von Brockdorff-Ransau's letter that he wrote to the Paris Peace Conference President George Clemenceau on the subject of the peace terms, and it was written in May of 1919. The text is on the left side of the document, and then I have entered comments on the left as I read through the sections indicating different parts of the letter. So first I wanted to make sure that I understood the context of the letter, who it was from, who it was addressed to, and what the time period was. And you can see all of this information indicated in the top of the letter. The tone of this letter was very important. As I started reading, he talks about what their expectations were, the grave obligations of the peace of justice, and then you start to see very strong language worked into the letter. Victorious violence of our enemies. Scrolling down, stating that it was more than the German people could bear. The tone of the letter is negative. They still refer to the Allies as our enemies and begin to assert that the reparations are more than the nation can bear. In the next part, I underlined there were some things that stuck out to me as I read the letter, and that was just seeing this term German, things that referred to their motherland. And you can see they refer to Germany as a she throughout the letter. But they start going through the territories and just pointing out how German these territories were. German to the core, amputated from the body of the state, purely German, German life, predominantly German circles. And to me, what stuck out in this section is that it had a very strong nationalistic tone. And this harkens back to the causes of the war. Students should remember the acronym MAIN, and one of the causes of World War I was nationalism. And this section of the letter still harkens back to that same mentality of having a very strong German nationalistic view. The next section, in the blue, they start to discuss the economic and the cultural effects of the reparations. Again, very strong language is used. They reference the Allied nations as enemies again. They also refer to themselves as slaves. Not only would it be impossible for the Germans to repay the Allied nations, but at the same time they would not be able to rebuild their own nation. It also discusses the mental and cultural deficits of the reparations. The language is very strong. Although the cost of the war has been expressly renounced, yet Germany, thus cut in pieces and weakened, must declare herself ready in principle to bear all of the war expenses to her enemies. The language is just very strong, and you can see the way that the German nation feels how the reparations will affect their nation. The reconstruction of our economic life is at the same time rendered impossible. The German people would thus be condemned to perpetual slave labor. Very strong language on how these reparations would affect the German people. Having to renounce their colonies. And also they mentioned not being able to send missionaries from Germany, which I thought was a very interesting measure to include. And that it wasn't just economic, that they included cultural elements as well. It discusses how it would affect the mentality of the German worker and the German people, and how the German nation felt about being excluded from the League of Nations. and referring to these reparations as their own death sentence. So you can start to see through this letter, before the peace talks have even concluded, about how they would feel and how it would affect their nation. So in the letter, they include some counter proposals, and these I have outlined in green. They want to take a lot of the responsibility of carrying out the reparations on themselves. They want to do their own disarmament. They want to have equal rights. In the eyes of the League of Nations, they do take some responsibility, and you can see that in their counter proposal, but it is muted. The tone of the language, which was very strong, very negative, kind of takes more of a muted tone when they make their counter proposals. Whereas they talked about the nationalistic tendencies earlier in the letter, then you see this reflected in their counter proposal when they talk about territorial questions. Germany was prepared to make payments. Talked about the cost that they were willing to bear, and setting a timeline. You can see May of 1926, which would be about 7 years after these peace talks. It says, though, that the German taxpayer shall not be less heavily burdened than the taxpayer of the most heavily burdened state among those represented on the Reparation Commission. Another counter-proposal, that they would devote their entire economic strength to the service of the Reconstruction. So they're not saying they shouldn't have to do anything. They just wanted to be able to control what they were doing. They offered to put their entire merchant tonnage into the pool of the world shipping. They want to still be a part of what's going on in the world. Coal mines, different resources that were available. They want to ensure to them free and equal rights for the German worker, and neutral inquiry into the responsibility for the war and culpable acts and conduct. What they want is dialogue, and you can see this in the end. The time allowed us for the preparation of this memorandum was so short that it was impossible to treat all the questions exhaustively. The feeling of the peoples who have made such immense sacrifices makes them demand that their fate should be decided by an open, unreserved exchange of ideas on the principle. He comes to this conclusion and his tone changes, and it's more calm and almost pleading. He requests time and dialogue, and then just ends out the letter. Only the cooperation of all nations, a cooperation of hands and spirits, can build up a durable peace. We are under no delusions regarding the strength of the hatred and bitterness which this war has engendered, and yet the forces which are at work for a union of mankind are stronger now than they ever were before. And those are his final statements. And the one that stuck out to me in answering this question, did the Treaty of Versailles, does it lead to World War II? Is this sentence here: only the cooperation of all nations, a cooperation of hands and spirits, can build up a durable peace. Because what we know that happens as a result of, maybe as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, we'll talk about that, but that Germany felt fractured. They felt that they were separated. They were not a part of the League of Nations. They were not a part of this cooperation, and they felt that they took on all of the responsibility of World War I. And we're going to talk about, does this reality lead to World War II, and the feelings that were allowed to take root and grow with the German population.